Live now. Okay, great. Senate Government Operations back on the 28th, the very last day of February. So we have with us Jen Kirby and Catherine Benham and Dan Dickerson from the JFO and Rent Council. And we are going to take a little time to sort of discuss where we're at with S39, which is the legislative compensation bill. Jen and Catherine and others are working on a potential survey. So I wanted them to give us an update on that. And then Senators White and Vyhovsky were looking at bills in the House and thinking, are there things in those bills that we may want to consider adding to or discussing, at least for our bill. So that's what we're going to do right now. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. So Jen, if you want to let us know what the status of the potential survey is.
Sure. Jennifer Kirby, Legislative Council. So yes, as the chair said, some of your staff have been putting together a potential survey to send out to legislators to understand what the likely take-up rate would be on certain benefits if they were offered. And so, so that would be helpful, I think, to the Joint Fiscal Office in giving you an estimate of what the costs would be of proposals that you are looking at, and then to you in helping direct me about what to draft. So we put some questions together. I think I sent it to the chair, and I've also sent it to Ashley and Connor in the Speaker and Pro Tem's offices, just because before we send something out to all of the members, we would want to get the okay from leadership as well. And so I'm just trying to.
Do you think it's okay to share the survey?
I think at this point it's sort of more in, and I'll turn to Catherine if she has thoughts too, but I think it's sort of in development stage.
Yes.
So far we've gotten no feedback from legislators on it. So
yes, I actually keep just looking at it right now. So
but I can describe the kind of thing that we were looking at. So we were looking to understand if people were able to purchase, if members were able to purchase health insurance coverage year round through the state, you know, the same, that 80-20 split that we've talked about, like the state employees, trying to gauge how likely they are to purchase the insurance and providing some information about the costs involved there, and whether if they were interested or likely to purchase insurance, would they plan to be doing the 1-person, 2-person plan or a family plan? What would the impact be if there was some sort of compensation available during the off session on their likelihood of purchasing health insurance? I think part of the issue that we're trying to navigate on this is not suggesting that these benefits are necessarily coming, because we don't know what you're all going to do as a legislature. So we're trying to be careful in how we phrase things to sort of be theoretical more than walking the legislature into enacting anything in particular. Also looking at whether if people were offered reimbursement for child care or dependent care or elder care, how likely they would be to use that. What other types of benefits people are most interested in, if you were going to look at expanding some of the offerings in the bill. And then also how likely people might be to use that idea of the accountable plan, the non-taxable treatment of rooms or lodging and meals expenses rather than the allowance. How likely are people to use that option? Because there may be some additional staffing needs in legislative operations if there's going to need to be some support there. So that would be additional cost as well. And then finally, we're trying to get a sense for age, really, whether people are over 65 years of age or over or under 65 years of age because of the Medicare piece and the health insurance that affects the cost.
Is there, I don't know if we talked about this, but is there a state Medicare supplemental that's given that state employees over the age 65 qualify for?
There are various opportunities. And I think in some cases, people who are already on the health and state employee health insurance, when they turn 65, can stay on it and only sign up for part of Medicare at that point. But then I think the Medicare may not be their primary coverage. Others, I think there's a wrap, which seems to me maybe more like Medicare supplemental, but there's various things going on in that space. Arlene from HR was gonna do some outreach to Department of Human Resources to get a better understanding of what those options look like.
Mm-hmm.
And Catherine and Dan, I don't know if you have more information on any of that.
No, I think you did a nice job, Jen.
Okay, I was just wondering, because as we're talking about health insurance, I know with a significant number of legislators over age 65, if there's some way we could give them something that would be helpful to them.
Exactly, and I think that's what we would be looking at, but just understanding from a cost standpoint, there may be less cost for the state for people who are over 65 because a majority of their coverage would be picked up by the federal government with Medicare, with the state paying some supplemental piece, and it may be different if people age onto Medicare while they're already on the coverage than people who are coming newly to it.
Okay, so that is an option. That's good to know.
I believe so. We may want to get some more information from DHR on exactly what that looks like.
Okay. So we can maybe have them back in. Are there other questions that you guys can think of that we might want to ask in this survey that's related to the bill? Obviously, there's a lot of things. Senator White.
I'm realizing that this might be slightly a diverted topic from what seems to be covered in the survey, but I'm wondering if we can ask related less to compensation and benefits and more to the workplace discrimination question. I would love to know, and it might be a separate thing. It might just be something we ask around and see if there's like general consensus on, but it seems like some of the stories of inability to have other employment or to be denied employment after being elected are pretty pervasive issues, but I'm only hearing anecdotal situations.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there would be a way to frame a question that asks, have you ever been denied employment or been, to Ashley Bartley's story, has a situation like that occurred? Have you had difficulty finding alternative employment due to your legislative role or something like that? Because it seems like a serious issue, but I'm only hearing anecdotal stories, and I don't want to make an assumption that it's a much wider scale problem than it may be.
Mm-hmm.
But that might be separate from the survey that we're trying to ask today. So I would look.
I mean, it's covered in the bill, sort of, you know, I mean, we might add some more language to cover it even better in the bill. So I'm just trying to figure out what kind of question we could ask that would get us information that's useful.
Right. I do also want to add that we are being careful to make the survey anonymous and have the results confidential and released only in aggregate form.
Right.
So that they can inform both the costing and the content that you want to put in your bill. It doesn't mean this question doesn't work, but I think we'd want to come up with a sort of either yes, no, or something that somebody, not a fill in the blank.
Yes.
All of these are kind of, click the radio button.
Yeah.
We're also trying to keep it short in hopes that people will actually complete it. Again, it doesn't mean we can't add an additional question.
Yeah. Senator Watson.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful to know if people are less employed outside of the legislative session as a result of their employment here.
Yeah. I think it helps for me understand then the healthcare question as well, because one of the reasons why the healthcare related questions in the bill, I would be responding to them certain ways, or I am responding to them in certain ways because I haven't found employment that so yeah, I'm happy to think about my question and maybe write an example and send it to Jen if that's appropriate.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think as long as it's generic, it can be made generic enough that it's not self-identifying and it's a yes or no question. I think your point about how it's tied to our ability to get health insurance, because we can't get a full-time job, is relevant to, you know, sort of making the case for the bill too.
And I think you could potentially frame it not just in a yes or no, but, you know, what, something like which of the following, if any, has been affected as a result of your legislative service, and then you could say, you know, my ability to, we could have a few options there.
Mhm.
That is great.
You know, ability
That's
to,
the best.
Yeah.
She's good.
Dang it.
Senator Watson?
Yeah, no, so I like that. I especially like that we're not setting the bar at like, has your employer committed some kind of, you know, chargeable offense, you know, by not employing you, you know what I mean? Like, we haven't all had that experience,
But I do think, to your point, like, I'm only able to hold enough clients in the off session that I can also hold during the legislative session, because I can't just say to my clients, like, see you in 5 months,
Right.
which actually limits my ability to work and make money in the off session.
Yes, yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
so we'll have to think about what some of
Thank you
these
for.
potential
Oh,
impacts.
Senator Clarkson, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Hi. So Jen and I are thinking along the same lines. I was thinking, what impact has your legislative work had on your work? Donna, I remember many legislators being able to answer that with very clear answers. You know, you can ask whether it's had impact on your pay, on your promotional, you know, on your seniority, you know, whatever. We could ask a bunch of those. I don't think that's difficult to ask. I think the healthcare piece is challenging without knowing what it would cost. So, I mean, no legislator is going to say, yeah, of course, I'd like to get healthcare, but I have to pay for it. You'd have to pay for it. And what's that going to cost? So, I think everybody, I mean, and we want to find out if people are already covered by their spouses and all that stuff. But so I think that's a challenging question to ask people in the abstract without a notion of what it would cost.
Well, just so you know, and I know you are all not seeing it, so apologies, but there's Jen or Catherine or Dan, whomever, included a little table of the premium costs. So
It's not on the website under Jen's testimony today.
No,
At least
it's not there yet.
Still a work in progress. we
Just
have not-
Jen-
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. I just have not gotten a chance to look at everything that was sent to me in the last 24 hours. Thank you.
Yep.
So that would give people sort of an overview of, like, the one person select care plan would cost $95.64 every 2 weeks, kind of thing. So they would have that kind of numbers to look at. Senator Vygotsky.
I just have a question. So my understanding is there are sort of 2 state employee plans. Like there's the tiers within both of them. Does the survey include both of the options, or
Shows the two, the select choice point of service plan and the total choice plan.
And
One thing we've talked about and did not put in, and I don't know what the thoughts would be from the committee on putting in a question. It's sort of, you'll see it in some of the House bills, I think, the idea of the state paying the 80% for a self-only plan, and the member being able to purchase, pay the 20% for the self-only plan, and then also, if they wanted to cover other family members, pay that difference. So the way it's kind of framed in the survey right now, it's looking at what if it was 80-20 for whatever level of whatever plan tier the member wanted. But at least one of the House bills puts out that idea of the member can buy up for family coverage if they want, but the state would be contributing for itself only.
I see, okay.
So it's not in there. I don't know if it's something you wanted to include or not. It's not something that is in.
I don't know if all the weeds are gonna make it more complicated for people
Yeah,
to do the survey.
That's sort of
too.
where we've been.
Yeah, I like that, seems pretty straightforward, what you have here, and people will be able to understand it without, and click a button pretty easily. And Catherine and Dan, does this, if the survey were something like this, would this give you enough information to be able to give us a more solid estimate?
Dan Dickerson, Joint Fiscal. I would feel certainly more confident that I do now. And, and I think it's simple enough that, I think people would hopefully take the time to do it. I would worry if we kept adding and adding and adding, then people would just ignore it. So
Yeah.
I think this hits that sweet spot.
Okay, good, well, thank you. Allison, Senator,
That's
question?
okay. Allison is here. Allison is asking, I think one of the key things we need to understand is how many hours, because we're trying to budget this out, how many hours off session a week do people work on legislative issues? I think one of the things I have been trying to get at for, 15 years is compensation for our legislative work out of session. So I think it's important for us, we have an opportunity in the survey to ask people to do a guesstimate on how many hours a week off session do they do legislative work.
Yeah, we could certainly ask that. The way the bill is right now is that it starting the next biennium compensates people for 1 day a week, basically, in the office.
I realize, but that may be high or low. I mean,
Okay.
I think it would be if we're going to ask people questions, we might as well ask that one.
Yeah, I was appreciative that Representative Emma Mulvaney Stanton had her hours laid out. I'm not.
She had a
sure-
chart, man.
Yes. I'm not sure.
We have a lot of charts.
Yes. I'm not sure every representative and senator will be as diligent in tracking that information. So I would love like a general question that gets to the how many hours you work, but not maybe to the detail that she was able to provide us.
So I'm tentatively writing, please estimate the number of hours you spend on legislative work per week outside the legislative session, and we could give some
Oh.
ranges.
Yeah, and I would say maybe on average, because
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, yep.
people spend, I spend full-time hours, and then there are weeks that I don't. Yeah.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. So the other two things that I wanted to talk about was Senator White and Vygotsky were looking at some of the House bills, some of the provisions in the House bills that are related to see if there were ideas that they had that we might want to consider adding to our bill.
Yeah.
Or that they did differently, maybe better than we did.
Well, I'll just say the Senator White, Senator Pekoske team were the best.
Yes, you are.
We went through the bills independently, and then we spoke briefly before. So some of the things that we noticed, do you want just the differences?
Yeah, go ahead.
So there are, I think we tracked 6 different bills at the end of the day that had some relevance on the House side related to our bill, which I think just in general, to make a case, means that there is a desire to have this question addressed by the legislature. So I just want to underline that. But they all kind of take a different tack. So 236, which is Larry Sakowitz's bill, there's some good points to it generally, but it pushes out the date for all of these to 2033. So that is definitely an angle that we could consider if we felt like we were making headway, but I personally didn't see, I would like to do something sooner. That's the update from the committee perspective. But it looks at there's a compensation increase, which we don't, or there's a pay increase on in-session compensation. There's health insurance, all that good stuff. So not a lot of difference. We might want to look, he does it slightly differently, and Jen and I were speaking about this before. He does it slightly differently in how he addresses the pay piece for the speaker and the pro tem in a way that we don't in our bill because they currently get like an out of session salary.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to think about that angle, we might want to look there. Then H218 is Emma Mulvaney Sanix bill, which has childcare benefits, the healthcare, and then it does the pay increase differently, which you had kind of taken note of.
Yeah, so the way that the Emma Mulvaney Stanics or Representative Mulvaney Stanics bill does pay is it ties it to area median income. So it gives the pro tem and speaker of the house 0.75 of the area median income paid biweekly throughout the course of the year. And for the rest of the General Assembly, it is 0.5 of the area median income, again, for the whole year in biweekly. Okay, so it actually assigns a salary that is linked and automatically adjusted based on area median income.
Which I kind of like.
And is area median income different for different, is it that specific different regions of the state?
Yes, it's
I
different.
think it is, but I think her bill ties it to Washington
I
County.
think it's average median.
Okay,
income.
average median income, which
Okay.
it's about
Statewide.
$60,000.
So it's not like somebody in Chittenden County would get paid more than somebody in Bennington County.
Ooh,
That's correct.
That would be tough, so,
that would be very tough.
That is correct, it's that average.
okay.
I kind of feel like and I don't want to necessarily make a case for that style, but we did speak about the idea of how to, because each of these bills that has like a pay increase, they're doing slightly different things. So it's like, how do we best have a conversation about increasing our pay while also not setting ourselves up to do this every 2 years because we have to we've set a specific number that in 10 years is so much less money. Which we now know with boards and commissions, you look at how everyone's getting $50, there's no connection for boards and commissions and we're struggling to get volunteers. So the same cycles would happen again. So we spoke a little bit about, could there be a way to tie the pay to a position? So like a position that exists in the executive branch or something that's similar. And I actually think that we can investigate that further, but the elegance of the AMI thing feels like the best one that I've seen so far. But we can go into that.
Wait, just can I stop you for a second? Because right now, our pay is tied to something. What,
Yep, it
remind us?
indexes. So under the existing law, and this was modified a few years ago, but right now, your weekly compensation is annually is adjusted consistent with the compensation increases provided to other constitutional officers, which is theirs gets increased, I think, on a schedule, except when with the Pay Act does something different. But I don't know if the
I can speak to that. So essentially, there's the annual Pay Act legislation, which does pay in two ways for exempt employees, and the constitutional officers are exempt employees as well as legislative staff. So they receive step increases as well as the cost of living increase. And so before this change was made a few years ago, legislators only ever got the COLA, the cost of living increase, but now you get both the COLA and the steps. So it's in line with what the governor gets as far as an annual increase.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Vihofsky?
So my understanding of a step increase, and maybe this is because I'm thinking of more traditional employment, is that they happen based on years of service. So does that mean more senior legislators are getting paid more than newly elected legislators, or is it different in an
No,
election
I believe you
system?
all get the same amount, but the step piece, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the step piece that exempt employees get that you're now hooked into is the average step increase
okay.
across, like the average percentage increase across all the classified positions, is what gets kind of imputed as the average step that gets used for the exempt employees. So that's what you're getting.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, I just want to say, Catherine, you don't need to hang out with us anymore. I think Dan probably can answer the questions. I don't want to waste your time. Thank you. Go ahead, Becca. Allison, now you're bigger on the screen.
Oh,
Go ahead, Allison.
So when this bill was originally done, oh, maybe 25 years ago, when the major resetting of legislative pay was done. And Jen, and Dan, you can tell me when that was, but it was just before I arrived. And I arrived in 05.
Yeah, I think it was, yes, it was done shortly before that.
So it was designed, as I recall, I was always told that it was designed to be, the legislative pay was designed to be the average Vermont wage, that it was designed based on the average Vermont income. And so I don't know how that would work now, but there is definitely, we're in the middle of doing the minimum wage bill. I mean, there is a way to calculate the average wage. So that is what I believe that was based on. And then sadly, the COLA never kept up. And now we're way behind. We're paid substantially less than what an average Vermont wage earner earns.
I'm happy to go through.
Yeah, keep going through the bills.
Okay, so then we have Rep. Hooper's, which is 237. I would say relatively similar with healthcare. He also has adjournment compensation. There's with slightly less money than ours does. They have 1/10 versus, he has 1/10 versus we have 1/5 for the adjournment stuff. But he does have life insurance. So that is one thing for thinking life insurance, not something that tops my chart, but I'm in a different age range and I'm not making eye contact with anyone in the room. And keeping my eyes down. So then there's two other bills where Ashley Bartley, there's two bills. Ashley Bartley has one that we had talked about where part-time versus full-time employment. I think we should definitely add that to the bill.
It's in our bill right now, but Jen, you and I talked about moving that date. Because right now the date is in law that you have to
Yes.
in writing.
Notification date, yeah.
The notification date to being within 2 weeks or something of being elected.
Under existing law?
Yeah,
No,
under current law, it's like within 10 days of declaring your intention to run or something like that. And so that's, 7 months before you might be in office. And so that is a huge timeline. And also I worry a little bit if you tell your employer I'm going to run for office, that then they have 7 months to find a reason to get rid of you.
Oh, completely.
So
Yeah.
I think we need to move that date up to maybe within within 2 weeks or 10
And you
days
might
of
not even-
election.
There's so many, how many of us have had the conversation where the person who is still actively in the role, I mean, I don't remember what the time difference is between when you can't, when people really start to think about not running again, or if this falls into that, but sometimes the people in those positions are not comfortable giving an answer yet.
Yeah.
So it puts people who are not incumbents in a much more difficult financial situation than folks who are incumbent. And I think that that's another angle to this that we don't spend enough time talking about, is the incumbency factor makes it financially easier to be in this role. And I think that's a big reason why we have a incumbency problem.
What do you mean the incumbency factor makes it a big?
Because you don't have to negotiate with your job, you've already set it up with your job, which the upfront ability to do that can be much more difficult than if you've set it up with your job. So that, and it typically costs a lot less money to run as incumbent. We tend to see incumbents doing less outreach in general, like they just have less work, it seems, is what I picked up on, for doing door knocking or actively campaigning. You've got the name recognition. So you don't need to take away as much time from your job, which can be helpful financially.
You also have been here longer and not worked for longer.
That's true.
I don't agree with a lot of that. I think that I know we all have varied experiences with incumbents, but incumbents, if they don't work as hard, are really, that's their bad. They need to be working as hard. And I don't see that there's any incumbency advantage to pay. There is modest expectation for the year of your second biennium that you know you'll be paid for something. That's about it. And I guess if you are working full time, you do have a setup already with your employer. I think the biggest hurdle we face, and we saw this on a couple races, is that full-time people who work full-time, it's very difficult to run. If you're running against somebody, it's very difficult to run. If you're working full-time, it's hard.
I think Becca's point was that the first time you have to have that conversation with your employer is the hardest time.
Oh, yes, I think that's the case. But also the employers seem to fail to recognize that they have to keep that job for that. I mean, there are requirements by law that they don't seem to be following.
Well, only if they get the notification, which is what we were just discussing.
Yeah, no, I heard you.
And then I'll do the last bill,
Yeah,
so
go
I don't
ahead.
drag this out any further, is H221, which is Gabrielle Stebbins' bill, and that's a short form study on the makeup of a legislative study committee that would look at the bigger connotations to this conversation. And maybe even a unicameral system. Just that's all I got.
Senator Duhovsky?
Yeah, I just want to add one piece, so particularly when we're talking about like the incumbency piece. In Representative Mulvaney's Stanek's bill, there's also some carve outs for reimbursement for newly elected members attending orientation. Right now, that's completely unpaid. And so her bill carves out mileage reimbursement and a stipend for each day of legislative orientation. Because that is time when they have to take off from their job. They're not yet eligible for legislative leave.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, similar to other similar things that come to my mind are, well, so next week, we're all going to a ton of town meetings, but none of us, we're not paid for next week. And then similarly, when we do professional development on the off session, our expenses are reimbursed for that, but we don't get paid for those days. So you have to, like, I had to take vacation days from my other job to go to do professional development for my legislative job.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So true.
Ruth, that is an excellent point. We are not paid for town meeting week, and it's yet the week we often work the hardest.
Yeah, and the other thing, I'm gonna just mention another elephant in the room, which is that the Senate has bigger districts, we have more constituents, we have 2 committees, we have, a sort of bigger job, and we're paid the same. And then chairs also have a bigger job, and we're paid the same. So there, I just said it, and now everybody can slam me for being a Senate chair and saying that, but it's the reality. So I think that it's hard to put something in the bill that pays people differently besides the pro tem and the speaker, but there are people who have more work for what they do. And I don't know, you guys, you 3 were in the other body, so you can speak to it directly about the workload. So just something to think about, and how to approach that diplomatically.
Yes, and Ruth, other legislatures, as we know from NCSL, pay premiums for, additionally for being a chair or being a majority leader.
Yes,
or
yes.
being something else, that if you have leadership roles, you are compensated for those.
Yes, absolutely. So I don't know how much
we run for parking spaces. That's what we do.
Oh, actually, can I just say one thing I did forget to mention on parking spaces?
Yeah.
There is.
Go ahead.
We should add, there is a section in one of the bills around parking for members with disabilities.
Oh.
So if they have to move their vehicle, and their best location is a paid parking space, if I'm explaining, I don't want to name a business, but I think we all know who I'm talking about. They are paying out of pocket for something that is something they need to use because of a disability.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something we should think about, because that is an issue that affects many legislators in this building. And I would say if there is other ways like that vein of supporting members with disabilities, I think also is affected by the healthcare conversation, and is also affected by the pay conversation, because I think we see fewer people with disabilities doing this job because of the pay and the lack of healthcare. So this would be something very minor.
Yeah,
to
well, I mean,
address
just
them.
parking and, I mean, you know, some of our other committee, I had to go to a meeting in Burlington and you have to sort of pay for parking there. And I couldn't get reimbursed for the parking. I mean, it was, you know, so there are lots of little things, not to sound petty about all of them, but definitely when you tie it to, you
Adds
know,
up.
the accommodating somebody with disability, I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, first of all, do people feel comfortable with the survey so that we can give Jen the okay to move forward with it, with those additions that we talked about for the employment question? And what was the other one?
Average number of hours per week you spend on legislative work outside the
That's it.
session, which I have for, you know, the moment at least given. So tell me if these seem like appropriate ranges. 0 to 5 hours, 6 to 15 hours, 16 to 25 hours, more than 25 hours. So I have no
Yeah.
idea what.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And, okay, so if you wanna, you tell me what you need me to do off, you know, in terms of working with leadership to get the survey out.
Okay.
But if we're comfortable with it, then let's give them the okay to do it. Is that, you guys good with that? Bob, you good with that?
Perfect.
Okay. And then the second question is do we want to give Jen any direction on what to add or take out of the bill at this point, or do we want to wait till we get the results of the survey? Because I think we're gonna do the surveys, you know, if you can get it out later this week, people will take it over town meeting, we'll crunch the numbers. And obviously this bill needs to make crossovers, so we need to vote this bill out when we get back. So, Tanya.
I have a question that I think is a ledge council question, and it's not something I had a constituent ask me why we didn't tie legislative pay to people's need for legislative pay, like,
Oh, yeah.
and I am wondering if that is even legal. So basically, like if someone, you know, has a bunch of big rental properties and is making $100,000 a year outside the legislature, they would be paid less than someone who works as a social worker and makes like $25,000 outside the legislature. Is that even legal?
I don't know off
Okay.
the top of my head. I'm happy to.
Except I'm not suggesting it, just it was a constituent question that came in, and so I was like, can you even do that?
I think our equal pay is one of the great things about us. Men and women, we have no pay discrimination in this building. It's one of the great levelers, and I would keep it that way. And I think.
But I
it would
wasn't
be a
suggesting
mistake.
it, I just wanted to get the legal way in because it was a constituent question that I couldn't answer.
Right, I mean, in general, I can't really think of a job that a person has where you only get paid to the extent of your need.
Me neither.
So it would determine,
And then
Which
how
makes
do you
me think it's
determine what
illegal.
the need
Kind of
is?
love that idea.
Um,
Nonsense.
so it's sort of income sensitized work as opposed to an income sensitized benefit.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Like I said, I'm not suggesting it, and I don't even want to muddy the waters, but I could not answer the question.
Yeah.
Right, yes, so my inclination is no, but I can't give you a good reason why, so let me know what thing and we'll get back to it.
Thank you.
Okay, are there things that people, Senator Watson?
Yeah, thanks. I was interested in a bunch of the pieces that seemed like there were that were different from what we have versus the House bill. So, but I don't have it as handily off the top of my head as to whether like some of these things are in there or not. So I just want to check up on a couple of things. So like the notification date change, is that in
That is,
there?
no, that is something we talked about a little bit during the early walkthrough, and I think it may be in,
it's in Bob Hoover's one, the H2
I
37.
don't think the,
Okay.
you're talking about the
I
notification
think
to
that's
the.
Ashley Bartley.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
I
I think
missed
that may
those.
be in
I'm missing.
H318.
Oh, I'll send you the doc.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I
we,
have the-
we do have something in our bill about it's from full-time and including half-time thing.
Right, so it's any, in your bill, you change it from just somebody needing to take leave from a full-time job to somebody needing to take leave from a job. So full or part-time. I think H318, which I did not draft, so I'm looking at it right now. But seems like it does have some different language around when the notice is and some other employment protections.
Well, I would just say that I'm interested in shifting the notification dates of what we
Okay,
talked about.
yeah, I think that makes sense. Does everyone agree with that? And then, I don't know whatever other the employment protections are that are in her bill, if we want to include those or not, but. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, no, thanks. So the other, I guess I have a question about the the life insurance.
Yeah.
This is not something that is provided even in part to regular employees of the state, right? Like that's, I don't know that, so.
I believe, I need to look at it. I'm not. Some tabs up here.
Looks like it is.
I can't recall if it is specifically for retirees.
Yes.
Because it's like an opportunity, it could be an opportunity for somebody, like I know some employers, it's just like, you can have access to it, but they don't fund it, and I don't think his bill
It
pays.
does. So this reads, the amount of life insurance for any retired employee shall be reduced and limited to $15,000 on the date of the employee's retirement.
Oh,
The
wow.
provision of this section shall apply to all retirees who complete 20 creditable years of service with the state before their retirement and are insured for group life insurance on their retirement date. The total premium for life insurance provided under this section and section 632 of this title shall be paid by the state on behalf of employees retired in accordance with the terms of this subdivision. Of this subsection, on behalf of employees who are on sick leave without pay for a period not to exceed 12 months and on the behalf of any employee on disability retirement until proof of total and permanent disability has been accepted by the insurance company. What this adds is it says members of the General Assembly shall be eligible for life insurance in the amount of $15,000 during their term or terms of service. The General Assembly shall pay 75% of the cost of the premium for the coverage, and the member shall be responsible for the remaining 25%.
Oh, that's a Benny. That's a
Well,
Benny.
so the survey does say, please indicate your top 3 priorities and includes life insurance. as part of this. So why don't we wait to
Yeah,
see
that
what
seems
people
fair. Yeah,
are most interested
yeah,
in?
that's fair. I think that's it.
You done?
That's it, right? Yeah.
Okay, Allison?
So, there are two things that, I think your mention, Ruth, of town meeting, I think town meeting should be part of our compensation. I actually think that we should include being paid during town meeting week. I've never understood why we weren't. Anyway, and the second thing is, remind me, Jen, what our retirement benefit what's our retirement benefit for having worked in the legislature?
Not
Nothing.
aware of one.
We have none.
Okay, so I hate to say it, but for those of us who have worked now almost 20 years for this body and for the state, it does strike me we are the only people who work for the state who are not compensated in any way for our years of service. And a retirement benefit, it's something I think maybe the study group could be looking at. Maybe that's something we could add to the study group.
It is on the survey, just like life insurance is, so we could
Oh,
wait.
okay, I guess I hadn't seen
The
that because I
survey
hadn't.
has life insurance, retirement, dental, vision, flex spending, employee assistance program, and disability insurance as all
Got it.
options people can
Having
vote
not
on.
Those were all the ones we could think of.
Yeah.
We're happy to put other ones on if you can think of other.
So I think we can wait and get that data to see what people are most interested in, and then maybe that will give us an idea of what we include.
I agree. The town meeting thing, I think, we may want to consider adding.
I don't believe that it's statutory. I think that has just been a custom. I'm looking at Dan, not that he can tell because you're over my shoulder.
Yeah, I was just researching that, and I don't know that you would have to alter statute to allow for compensation during town meeting. But that
Good.
it might be something that the clerk and the secretary would need to rule on as far as like adjourn, when you adjourn for an extended period of time, whether that's continued session or not session. So I couldn't answer that, but there's nothing in statute that specifically precludes you from receiving compensation during town meeting.
Okay. Well, maybe one of you can.
I will email the clerk and secretary,
Ask
copy
them.
Dan, or.
And then, I mean, because it seems like during town meeting week, getting our stipend plus mileage, because a lot of us drive to 8 million different town meetings, that not obviously food and lot maybe, well, although we have, Anyway, we can talk about town meeting, and I see Senator Ron Hinsdale is here, and I don't want to make her wait. We're talking about legislative compensation though, so.
Howard too.
Are there other things we want to make sure Jen has right now before we, because we're not going to take this bill up again until after the break. Tanya?
I do like the idea of including paying people who have been hired to attend or who have been elected to attend orientation.
Oh, yeah, the orientation piece, yeah, I think that makes sense, and then maybe professional development.
Yeah, no, I thought there was something about professional development in this one too, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me until I had to take vacation days to go.
I
to a
didn't do it, sometimes I paid time off, so it was just unpaid time. I also, and maybe this can be placed in the study group, because I do actually like the idea of tying legislative salaries to area median income. I mean, it sounds like initially that was sort of the intention of how salaries were set up, and it just didn't travel. So maybe, I don't know what the difference in cost would be, probably substantial, but I would like to at least look at that as a pathway.
Okay, yeah, maybe Dan, maybe.
Tanya, I think the question is, what would be the difference between how it was originally envisioned as being the average Vermont wage versus the area median income? What area would we choose?
Right, I think in the bill, it is the average in Mulvaney Stanning's bill, it is the average statewide. I think I'm not gonna get the term right, but I don't think it's area, I don't think it's location.
It's median income.
Because you're all surveyed.
Right.
Yeah.
Every area has a different
The
median.
annual average wage.
There we go, thank you.
Okay.
See?
Well, maybe we can look at that. I don't know, Dan, if you have any estimates on that you could include in next time you do some kind of estimate for us. If we were to go to that, how much it would cost?
Yeah, I was still digging through statutes, so I missed a part of what you were saying, but I can always listen to the YouTube feed, so I
can fill you in.
Yeah,
Okay,
Jen can let you
perfect.
know what. we are
Apologies
at.
for missing that.
In 281.
Yeah, basically in another bill.
And Dan, while you're digging through statutes, would you be kind enough to find that original language on the pay in between 2000 and 2004, whenever this was enacted? What the language was
I
it
can do
average
that
Vermont
piece.
wage or what?
I can do that piece too, I think that's
Yeah.
more digging through old session law and statute is more my area. But I will fill Dan in as I go along.
Thank you,
Alright.
Jen.
This sounds good. At least we have, Jen, is there anything else that might be helpful for us to decide right now for you?
I don't think so. I think the only other question that I would ask you, going back to the survey and that question that you had around the impact of service on opportunities for employment is sort of mentioned a few things like impact on the ability to have a job with health benefits. What else do you want to know? I put impact on my ability to work in my chosen field in case there was somebody who wasn't able to make that work. Like that. I don't know what you're looking for or what would be. I think particularly thinking about what you're trying to do legislatively, what is it that you are hoping to learn from that that might change the way you want to
I mean,
craft
for
your
me,
bill?
it's impact on the ability to have a full-time
Yes,
job. Like, nobody's gonna hire you for a full-time job when you have to do this, so.
And have you been actively not like, yeah, because to your point earlier, like, we're not trying to catch people who have been victims of crimes with workplace, this, whatever. But I do think those are the questions I would want to ask. I can't, I'm trying to think of another one to give you, but I.
Right, so
It's not
impact on
something
ability to
that's-
have a full-time, I mean, I guess, what do you mean by a full-time job? Because I think some people work full-time not during the session.
Right,
So
right.
what do you mean by?
Yeah, full-time year-round, yeah. I mean, I don't
Wouldn't
know.
that be everybody?
I guess it would be everybody, but yeah.
Well, I know what you're all doing from January to May.
That's a good point.
I mean, I know some people do also work on evenings and weekends and other
Mondays.
jobs, Mondays.
Could you, what was it, because I think one of the points is figuring out if you've been, yeah, maybe it is saying part-time, or like other employment, like full employment? Like instead of fully employed, it's like full employment? Because you can't, this isn't a full-time job in the way that we're describing it now.
Well, it's a temporary full-time job.
Yes, so I don't know how to, yes.
It's a part-time, full-time job.
I don't know how to get at that, that's not just gonna confuse people.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm gonna have to think more.
Because as I'm talking to you and conversing with you, I'm like, yes, I would say yes to that for myself.
Yeah, I think
But-
probably everybody in the building would say yes in some way, depending on how you ask it.
Right,
But-
so I think if we can come up with what would be, what answer or what information would change what you want to put in the legislation?
Right, that's a good
Because
question.
that's really the purpose of this survey, is to help Dan cost out the options and to help you get the information to figure out what you want to put in legislation.
I also think a benefit to the survey, and maybe this is not correct in my description of the survey, but is to get an understanding of the scope of the problem that we're dealing with. Because I think that there is an argument that is going to be made against the benefits, that all of these situations are anecdotal. And I would love to be able to, and maybe that's not the point of the survey, I understand that. So I'd like to understand the scope of the problem we're trying to address, which is, are people able to access is this a position that has someone been denied the ability to do their other job, which to your point might not be legal, so then I don't know what maybe we don't want to ask that question. Or two, are people unable to find other employment in general that fulfills, like,
Yeah, I think maybe it's more of, are you unable to find employment that provides you with employee benefits that you need?
yeah,
And are you unable to find employment that provides sufficient compensation to, support yourself and your family?
yes,
Those are the two
Yes.
basic things,
Yes.
and those are the problems we're trying to solve,
yes.
is to get people benefits that they need and compensation that they need, just compensation more broadly.
Because
So-
if people are answering no to that question, then I'm like, oh, okay, well then, maybe this is not as big of a need.
But how many people aren't here because they couldn't figure out how to navigate the answer to that question?
Right,
So I think we might be pooling the wrong, like, we're polling the group of people that somehow figured out how to make it
Right,
work, not the
right.
people who can't.
right, that is true, I'm not sure how we're gonna pull
We
everybody.
can't.
because we don't want to interrupt. Allison, go ahead. Thank you.
Tanya, to Tanya's good point, I mean, we can't find out what the barriers are for other people, but we can understand the impact on current legislators. So for example, Ann Watson, who works full-time as a teacher, there may or may not be impacts. There were impacts for people I knew who served before in the House with me, who were teachers, and there were impacts to their work because they served. And I think those are the kinds of things we need to find out, not necessarily, so we need, and if you're job hunting as a legislator, that's a slightly different thing. I mean, you are knowing, I think that's also a slightly different thing, but I think we're trying to identify what the impacts are on your work by your choosing to also do public service.
Okay, we're gonna stop the conversation.
Okay, and I think, yes, I'm not sure how best to capture that question on
Okay,
a sort of push the button, pick the button that best matches your
Yeah.
situation. Because I think they're all open-ended questions that you want to hear from your colleagues on. And so there may be some other mechanism for doing that.
yeah,
Um,
we can take more testimony for sure to get it on the record. So why don't we think of a list of people? I have a couple people I've thought of since then. So if you could all give me names, I can.
Maybe we can coordinate on whether and to what extent you want that question in there
Okay,
or not.
sounds good. Thank you, Jen.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. And we're gonna move on to our next.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, right.
Okay.
Thanks, Jen.
I'm sitting.
Yeah. So we have Michael Chernick, who's coming up on Zoom. So we'll just have Senator Rom Hinsdale go first. Hi, Michael. We have Senator Rom Hinsdale in the room with us, so we're gonna have her just introduce the bill and then you can walk us through the language if that works. Okay,
Very good, thank you.
thank you. So welcome,
Thank you.
and why don't you tell us about the bill?
Thank you. For the record, Senator Sharon Hinsdale, and also for the record, I tested negative today. And it's hard for me to talk through a mask.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm in lung capacity right now. And I brought my intern Zoe Moy, who's a CBU student. Thought she might want to see what I consider a relatively straightforward bill introduction. It's always dicey to say that, but I think as Senator Clarkson could probably affirm, we spent a couple days on this bill because it does have some governmental considerations about lowering flags. But there was unanimous support here. This bill has, I think, every senator on it, and it did pass last biennium in the Senate. Not sure what happened in the House. And some of you may have been to Overdose Awareness Day events in your community or here at the State House. They've taken place. You know, it's obviously a very somber event, usually organized by the families of people who have lost someone to an overdose, also reflecting on, you know, the potential good fortune you might have that you didn't lose someone to an overdose, but that the opioid crisis is affecting many families in Vermont. We have some statistics in the bill, and as you probably are aware, we sometimes are able to celebrate that those fatalities have gone down, and we're not in a position to do that right now. As we look at the bill, again, we are increasing our number of overdose fatalities once more. The government operations consideration about what does this mean for the state to add a new holiday where you lower the flags to half staff was one that we took testimony on last biennium. Of course, you may want to do that again. It was Buildings and Grounds that had to offer their thoughts on any burden that it would present to lower the flags. And at the time, and I can dig up the email, but the employee who had that responsibility, she probably emails between 250 and 300 people who control state affiliated flags around the state. So it could be municipal, it could be a state building, but they generally participate in the lowering of flags when the governor calls for it or we have a holiday related to it. And she at the time said she thought this was, you know, in her estimation, of a really meaningful opportunity to educate people about why the flags were being lowered. And she takes her job obviously very seriously and thought this was a nice addition and that it wouldn't present any problems. So that was kind of the policy matter we had to address before passing the bill. And again, we did pass it, and it got lost on in the other body. But I think this will continue to be an informal holiday or one that the governor recognizes and we might recognize in an ad hoc way. And this community that's been involved in organizing these events is asking that it be a permanently recognized holiday. I'm sure we'd all agree, we hope one day we don't need it anymore, but until that time, you know, they don't want to have to keep coming back to the state to ask for this recognition.
Thank you, Senator. Is this, in the sense of a holiday, it's lowering the flags, but it doesn't mean it's like a day off from work kind of holiday?
Right,
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't come with any employment designation of a
Okay.
holiday.
And how was August 31st chosen? What, do you know what, if that's a,
Question, it is a national
oh, it is a
date,
national date?
yes, and I could always give you the name of others, you know, the families that have brought this forward for a couple of biennia, I'm not sure if that's what you say. But it's a national, it might even be international, but it's a.
Okay.
Oh, it is, yeah. Is it international?
international.
Okay.
It's funny, because this past year, I remember even actually texting you about it. It was the first day of school. So I couldn't come up
Right.
because it was the first day of school. So I was just wondering if there was a better day, but if it's an international day, we're not gonna mess with that
Right.
date.
Yes, and it has some significance that might be
Yeah,
people of all.
yeah. Are there other questions for Senator Brown Hinsdale? Senator White?
I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this bill up. I know the Windsor County delegation attended an overdose awareness day in Windsor, and it was a really, I think, important experience for me to be a part of. But also, it was a really powerful, I think, like healing moment for the community. So I appreciate this bill. And I would say that I had firsthand experience with the flag lowering piece because my husband, when he worked for the parks for many years, was the recipient of that email list.
Right.
And I would always ask him, like, what is it today?
Yeah,
And
it's usually not a happy
it's
occasion.
exactly,
unfortunately.
it's
Yeah.
and it's so many different things,
Mhm.
but the minor work of that acknowledgement, I think, actually has a big impact for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
I think it's worth it. So thank you for.
It's a really good point. I think we all kind of look to see the flag and wonder if there was a unique event that we missed, or, you know, honoring someone who passed away or something like this. So it raises a lot of awareness, and that was Building and Grounds attitude about this, is they felt like they were actually doing their part, you know, in a small way by sending an email about the event to participate in some kind of activism and movement. And as you noted, you know, a lot of communities will have images of people who've been lost to overdoses blown up and put around public spaces, so it can be healing, you know, as well as just a really critical humanization and reminder of who we've lost and why we try to ensure we don't lose anybody else.
Thank you. And if you have names of witnesses, if you
Yeah.
can get them to me or to Olivia, and we're gonna try to make this have this make crossover. So we're not gonna take a ton of testimony, but if it would be nice to hear from a couple people on it.
Okay.
We'll definitely get the BGS person.
Okay, so yeah, I would say ask BGS who that person is now, because I wouldn't want to like pull out an email.
Yeah, we can do that.
And I will get the name of the person who's part of this network of mostly family members that originally brought the proposal to me.
That was
great. And we have the witness list from last year.
It was really short. I'm not even sure, honestly, if we heard from someone impacted or participating in the day. I think it was just Buildings and Grounds.
Okay, I'd like to
If you'd
hear
like
from
at least
somebody.
one name.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to hear from a family member. somebody
I
impacted.
will get that. I will get that.
Give us a little bit more emotional.
I'm happy if you want us to invite the organizers.
We have a great person in Windsor.
Okay, that would be
Yeah.
great. So just give the name to Olivia, and we're not gonna take a ton of time, but we wanna just, you know, give the bill respect. And give
Yeah.
some testimony on it, so.
It is really meaningful if we finally pass this, and those families, I think, would like to to be part of that again and have it be successful this time for our friends in the house.
Yeah, I will talk to my friend in the house and
Thank
make
you.
sure that his committee finds time for it.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for prioritizing this for crossover. It means a lot to those folks impacted.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Michael.
It's
You
fun
wanna-
to be in here. Yes.
Every day.
Yeah, it's a fun place to be. Could you
Whenever
walk,
you're ready, Senator.
yeah, go ahead, whenever you're ready, Michael.
I'm ready. Okay, very good. First of all, this is Michael Chernick from Legislative Council. And my apologies for not being in the room, but under the circumstances, I felt a bit more comfortable testifying remotely. And I appreciate your indulgence on that issue.
Our
right.
pleasure, no worries at all.
Number one is, before I get into the substance, I just for maybe 30 seconds want to explain that in Title I, Chapter 7, we have two different classifications of types of days. You have legal holidays and you have commemorative days. And while I won't go over all the list, the legal holidays, for example, include Town Meeting Day and Memorial Day. Those are the ones that potentially have a state employee's day off, but even for those, the VSEA and the Agency of Administration have to negotiate. Then we have a number of what we call commemorative days, which is a far shorter list, for which there's never a question of state employees having the day off. Arbor Day, American History Month, POW MI Recognition Day, Juneteenth, Healthcare Awareness Month, and most recently Green Up Day, River Green Up Month. And this would fall in that latter category. And as you said, Madam Chair, the one state involvement in this, other than maybe a statement out of the governor's office and from other officials, would be BGS. And you should hear from BGS directly on the flag piece.
Okay.
With that being said, this is S-104. And the bill proposes to designate August 31 as Overdose Awareness Day. As was mentioned, this is an international day observed in other locations, and direct the Vermont state flag to be flown at half-staff on all state-owned flagpoles on the state. And the General Assembly first hear a series of findings that, according to the Vermont, and I compiled these very recently within the last 2 months, according to the Vermont Department of Health, from 2020 to 2021, opiate-related fatal overdoses among Vermonters rose 33% from 158 to 210. 90% of the 2021 deaths involved the use of fentanyl. From January through October 2022, there were 190 opioid-related fatal overdoses, of which 179 involved fentanyl. Since 2014, over 47,000 naloxone rescue kits have been distributed to Vermonters as an overdose prevention measure. And number two, International Overdose Awareness Day is observed on August 31 of each year to raise awareness of drug overdoses, to reduce the associated stigma, and to acknowledge the grief of the families and friends of persons who have experienced a drug overdose. Just one point where you hear me citing 2021 data, and if you think that sounds a little bit old, in those categories, that's indeed the last data that's available. So then the substantive part of the bill is Section 2, and that would add a 1 VSA 378 as 1 VSA 377 is the Green Up Day. So VSA 378 would read Overdose Awareness Day. August 31 of each year is designated as Overdose Awareness Day. And then Section 3 of the bill, 1 VSA Section 496F is added to read Flag Protocol Overdose Awareness Day. The Department of Buildings and General Services shall direct in the flag flying protocol established in Section 496D of this title, meaning Title I, that the Vermont state flag shall be flown at a half-staff overall on all state-owned flagpoles on August 31 each year in observance of Overdose Awareness Day. And then finally, Section 4 is your effective date, which is the standard effective date of July 1, 2023, though we always put that in the bill now as a matter of form. So in other words, this bill would be effective should the bill pass, for August 31 of this year. And that's it.
Excellent. Are there any questions for Michael? Seems pretty straightforward. I think we don't have any questions, so thank you so much. Unless you have suggestions besides BGS on anyone we might need to hear from.
No, you definitely, the woman who, at least the woman with whom I dealt with several years ago on a different bill, she's very informative, very articulate in explaining the process before committee. She's a veteran at doing this. And I think that would be very prudent, if I may say so, for you to hear directly from BGS on the mechanics.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Stay safe.
Thank you, senators. Take care.
Bye-bye.
So Olivia, can you find out who that is, the flag person at
Yes,
BGS? And we'll have,
I can see who they had in last year.
Yeah, we'll have that person in and maybe one or two other people, and then we'll try to pass this out early in our week when we come back.
And I have an email going out to
Your
Selectwoman Howard.
Awesome. We will do that. So wait, what do we have next?
3:30.
3:30. So if we want to take a few minutes of a break, we're going to have Tim come walk through a miscellaneous ethics bill. You probably remember we heard some testimony from the Ethics Commission with some suggested language, and that's what this is. So we'll walk through that when Tim gets here.
I'm moving my car, so if I'm late coming back,